The safe deposit box was empty. I need you to hear that the way I heard it, standing in the vault room of First National Bank of Savannah with a brass key in my hand and 3 months of grief in my chest and the expectation that whatever my dead father left me in Box 1066 would explain the things he never explained while he was alive. His past, my mother, the birth certificate that didn't exist in the county records, the photographs that were never on the walls, the questions he answered with silence and a change of subject and a smile that said, "Someday, baby," except someday never came, because my father died on a Wednesday morning in June at age 68 and took his silences with him and left me a key to a box that was supposed to contain the truth. I opened the box. Nothing. Not a document, not a photograph, not a note, not even dust. Just the clean, cold interior of a metal rectangle that had been holding something for 31 years and was now holding nothing, which was worse than holding bad news because bad news at least has a shape. Nothing has no shape. Nothing is just a hole where an answer was supposed to be. I stood in that vault for 4 minutes. I know because the bank manager, a woman named Patty, was standing behind me checking her watch with the specific patience of a person who's watched people open boxes full of disappointment before and knows the silence that follows. Then I took the receipt and walked out. The receipt showed the box number, 1066, the date it was opened, 1993, the year I was born, and a reference line I didn't understand. Associated Trust, the Meridian Trust, New York, NY. 2 hours later, I was sitting in a cafe on Broughton Street in Savannah, staring at that receipt, trying to Google the Meridian Trust on my phone and finding nothing useful, when a man at the next table looked over. He wasn't trying to read my paper. The receipt was face up on the table between my coffee and my phone, and the box number and the trust name were printed in bold, and his eyes caught them the way eyes catch things they recognize, automatically without permission from the brain. The color left his face, not slowly, the way water drains from a sink, top down, fast. What remained was the white of a man who'd just seen something he'd been looking for and something he'd been afraid of at the same time. "Where did you get that?" he said. "My father left me a key." "Your father's name?" "Thomas Clement." The man stood up. His coffee cup rattled against the saucer. His hands were trembling. He pulled out his phone, dialed a number, and said 4 words into it that I would spend the next 72 hours trying to understand. She found the box. 30 minutes later, he was sitting across from me in the same cafe, his hands wrapped around a coffee he wasn't drinking, telling me that the empty box wasn't empty by accident. Someone had taken what was inside. Someone had cleaned it out 6 months before my father died, and the person who did it was flying to Savannah tonight on a private jet to meet me. "Who is he?" I asked. "His name is Edmund Voss." "I don't know that name." "No, but he knows yours. He's known it for 31 years. He's been looking for you for 19. That night, Edmund Voss, 74 years old, net worth $3.8 billion, chairman emeritus of Voss Capital Partners in Manhattan, philanthropist, art collector, a man whose name is on buildings at Columbia and NYU, sat in the living room of my dead father's house on East 37th Street in Savannah, Georgia, looked at my face, and said 6 words to his attorney that rearranged every molecule of my existence. "Then she has no idea who she is." He was right. I had no idea. Not who I was, not who my mother was, not who the trembling billionaire sitting across from me in a postal worker's living room was, and not why a copy of The Great Gatsby on my dead father's bookshelf contained a letter from a woman named Celeste who died in a Brooklyn apartment in 2005 with my name written on the envelope and the truth hidden inside the pages. But before you understand what was in that box, who took it, and why a man worth $3.8 billion was trembling in the living room of a man who earned $42,000 a year delivering mail, you need to know about Thomas Clement, the man who raised me, the man who drove a billionaire's car for 11 years and then drove a billionaire's granddaughter to Savannah and spent 31 years pretending she was his. Subscribe before I continue, not for the algorithm. For every child who ever discovered that the parent who raised them loved them more than the parent who made them. I grew up on East 37th Street in Savannah, Georgia, a small house in a quiet neighborhood where the oaks grow so big They lean over the streets like they're trying to listen to the conversations happening below them. Savannah is a city that collects secrets the way other cities collect traffic. Slowly, beautifully, and in quantities that would surprise you if you looked closely enough. My father's secret was the biggest one I've ever found, and I'm an archivist, which means I find things for a living. Thomas Clement, my father, 68 years old when he died, 5'10", thin build. He wore the same style of clothes every day: khaki pants, a button-down shirt, clean shoes, the uniform of a man who believed that being well-dressed was a form of self-respect, and self-respect was the only wealth he could afford. He worked at the United States Post Office on Barnard Street for 25 years. He sorted mail. He delivered mail. He stood behind a counter and handed packages to people and said, "Have a good day," with a sincerity that most postal workers lose by their third week, and Thomas never lost because Thomas Clement was constitutionally incapable of insincerity. He raised me alone. He told me my mother's name was Catherine. He told me she died in childbirth. He told me there were no photos because we lost them in a move. He told me these things with a steadiness in his voice that I mistook for truth, because children don't audit their parents. They trust them. They take the story they're given and build their identity on it the way you build a house on a foundation. And if the foundation is a lie, you don't know until the house starts leaning. My house leaned. I just didn't notice until I opened an empty safe deposit box and the whole structure shifted. Thomas made me grits every morning, every single morning. Grits, eggs, toast. He stood at the stove at 6:15 a.m. with a wooden spoon in his hand, stirring, and the sound of the spoon against the pot was the sound of my childhood, the soundtrack of a girl who didn't know who she was but knew what breakfast smelled like, and knew that the man making it loved her in a way that didn't need explanation because it was demonstrated daily, with butter and salt and the quiet attentiveness of a father who never once made her feel like she was anything other than his. He walked me to school. He helped me with homework at the kitchen table. He came to every parent-teacher conference. He sat in a small wooden chair designed for a child's body and listened to my teachers tell him I was smart, I was organized, I was meticulous about details, which is what adults say about children who will grow up to be archivists. They just don't know it yet. He never married. I asked him about this when I was 13. "Dad, how come you never got married again?" He looked at me across the kitchen table with an expression I now recognize as the face of a man calculating how much truth a 13-year-old can hold without it spilling. "Some people get one great love in their life, baby girl. I got mine." He meant me. I didn't understand that then. I understand it now. I started asking about my mother at age 7. The questions were small at first, the kind children ask because they see other children with mothers and wonder where theirs went. What did she look like? Did she like the same things I like? Was she funny? Thomas answered everything with the same calm specificity that made his answers feel real, even though they weren't. She had dark eyes like yours. She loved art. She was the funniest person in any room. These answers were true. He was describing a real woman, just not the woman he told me she was. As I got older, the questions got harder. Why was there no birth certificate for me in the Chatham County records? Thomas said the hospital made an error. Why was there no marriage certificate? Thomas said the marriage happened in another state and the records were lost. Why were there no photos of Catherine anywhere? Not one, not a single snapshot or Polaroid or newspaper clipping. Some things from the past are better left there, baby girl. I stopped asking, not because I believed him, because questioning my father felt like a betrayal, and the only parent I had was the one standing at the stove at 6:15 a.m., making grits with a wooden spoon, and betraying that man was a door I couldn't open. I became an archivist. I got a job at the SCAD library cataloging rare documents, manuscripts, historical artifacts. I spend my days finding things that have been lost, misfiled, miscategorized, forgotten. The irony is obvious. A woman who can locate a 17th century Savannah property deed in a database of 2 million records couldn't locate her own birth certificate. But irony only works in retrospect. At the time, it just felt like a career. Thomas's health declined at 65. Heart disease, the quiet kind that doesn't announce itself with drama. It just reduces a man's capacity in stages, the way a dimmer switch reduces light, until one day the room is dark and you realize you've been adjusting to the dimness for so long that you forgot what full brightness looked like. I moved back to Savannah from Atlanta to be closer. I got the SCAD position. I visited Thomas every evening. We ate dinner together. We watched Jeopardy. We argued about cornbread. He added sugar, I didn't, and the argument had been running for 20 years without resolution, because some arguments between fathers and daughters aren't meant to be resolved. They're meant to be repeated, which is its own form of love. Thomas died on a Wednesday morning in June 2024. Heart failure. At home. In his chair. The television was on. The evening news. His coffee was on the side table, still warm. I found him when I came for dinner at 5:30 p.m. He looked peaceful. He looked like a man who'd finished his shift and clocked out. I sat with him for an hour before I called anyone, not because I was in shock, because I wanted one more hour with my father in his chair in his house before the world started its machinery of removal, the ambulance, the funeral home, the paperwork, the process that turns a person into a file. I'd spent my career working with files. I wasn't ready for my father to become one. My father was a postal worker who made grits every morning and watched Jeopardy every night and left me a key to a safe deposit box that was supposed to contain the truth about who I am. The box was empty. Someone cleaned it out 6 months before he died. And that someone was my biological grandfather, a billionaire from Manhattan who sent his attorney to a bank in Savannah and took the only evidence my father had hidden from me because he wanted to control the truth instead of letting my father deliver it. If you've ever discovered that the story of your life was written by someone else and the version you knew was the edited draft, tell me about the moment you found the original. Mine was in a cafe on Broughton Street, staring at a receipt for an empty box. 3 weeks after the funeral, I went through Thomas's things. His house was modest and organized the way a postal worker's house is organized. Everything in its place, nothing wasted. The aesthetic of a man who'd spent 25 years sorting other people's correspondence and applied that precision to his own life. In the nightstand drawer, a brass key, small, worn, and a folded note in Thomas's handwriting. Box 1066, First National Bank of Savannah, for Nadia, when I'm gone. I held the note for a long time. His handwriting, the same handwriting that had signed my permission slips and written my birthday cards and left notes on the kitchen counter that said, "Dinner in the fridge, baby girl, don't forget to lock the back door." The handwriting of a man who communicated in short sentences because he believed that the truth doesn't need decoration, it just needs delivery. I also found, on the bookshelf in his study, a worn copy of The Great Gatsby. This was unusual because Thomas Clement was not a reader. He owned maybe 12 books, most of them about gardening or Savannah history, or the particular variety of Southern cookbook that treats butter as a philosophy rather than an ingredient. A novel about wealthy people on Long Island didn't fit. I set it aside to look at later. September 2024, 3 months after Thomas's death. I drove to First National Bank on Bay Street. I presented the key, my ID, and the death certificate. Patty Rawlings, the bank manager, led me to the vault. Box 1066, brass, small, the kind of box that holds documents, not valuables. I put the key in, turned it, opened it, empty. Patty checked the records. The box was opened in 1993 by Thomas Clement. It was accessed one other time in 31 years. 6 months ago, in March 2024, by a secondary key holder authorized under the name E. Voss. Patty showed me the authorization form. The signature was precise, mechanical, the handwriting of a person who signs legal documents so frequently that the act has become a motor function rather than a communication. "Do you know this person?" Patty asked. "No." The authorization was filed through a trust called the Meridian Trust, based in New York. They had a co-ownership provision on the box through the original rental agreement. I didn't know what the Meridian Trust was. I didn't know who E. Voss was. I knew that my father had maintained a safe deposit box for 31 years, since the year I was born, and someone had cleaned it out 6 months before he died, and the someone had a name I'd never heard connected to a trust in a city my father had no connection to, or so I thought. The cafe. Broughton Street. 2 hours later. Coffee getting cold. Receipt on the table. Phone in my hand, searching for answers that the internet didn't have because the answers weren't on the internet. They were in a private jet heading south from Teterboro Airport in New Jersey, sitting in the hands of a 74-year-old man who'd been waiting 19 years for this moment and had spent the last 4 months watching from a distance, waiting for his chance to control it. Martin Hale, the man at the next table, 52 years old, Edmund Voss's personal attorney. He wasn't at the cafe by accident. He'd been in Savannah for 3 weeks, monitoring me since Thomas's death, waiting for the moment I went to the bank. Edmund had sent him because Edmund Voss doesn't leave revelations to chance. He scripts them the way a director scripts a scene, with blocking, lighting, and a clear idea of who enters and who exits, and when. Martin saw the receipt, the box number, the trust name. He went pale because the plan had just accelerated. I wasn't supposed to go to the bank for another month, according to Edmund's timeline. I went early because grief doesn't follow timelines. Grief goes to the bank when it feels ready, which is never, but September felt less never than October. Martin sat across from me. He told me his name. He told me he worked for Edmund Voss. He told me Edmund had been looking for me. Looking for me? Why? Because he believes you're his granddaughter. I didn't laugh. I didn't cry. I did something worse. I went still. The specific stillness of a person whose brain has received information it cannot process and has decided to pause all operations until further notice. My grandfather was Stanley Clement. He died before I was born. Thomas Clement was not your biological father, Nadia. He raised you. He loved you. He was the best thing that ever happened to you, but he wasn't your biological parent. Then who was? Martin shook his head. That's not my story to tell. It's Edmund's. He's on his way. He'll be here tonight. You've been watching me. I've been waiting for you to find the box. The box was empty. I know. I'm the one who emptied it. On Edmund's instructions, 6 months ago. The stillness broke. What replaced it was a cold, clean fury that I recognized from my professional life. The fury of an archivist who's discovered that someone has removed documents from a collection without authorization. Except the collection was my life, and the documents were my identity. You stole what my father left for me. We secured, you stole it. Whatever was in that box, Thomas Clement put it there for me. He wrote my name on a note. He kept the key in his nightstand for 31 years. And you walked into a bank and took it because a billionaire told you to. Martin didn't argue. He didn't apologize. He sat with the accusation the way attorneys sit with accusations, absorbing them without admitting them, filing them for later. He'll explain everything tonight, Nadia. I know this is a lot. You have no idea what this is. Edmund Voss arrived at 8:47 p.m. A black sedan pulled up to the house on East 37th Street. I watched from the front window. A man got out, tall, 74 years old, but carrying himself like a man who's been told his age is a suggestion. He wore a dark coat over a dark suit, and his silver hair was the kind of silver that expensive men have, the silver that comes from good genes and better barbers. He walked up the path to my father's front door. My father's front door. The door Thomas Clement had painted every 3 years because maintenance was how Thomas showed love. A billionaire was walking toward a door a postal worker had maintained, and the distance between those two men's worlds was 20 feet of sidewalk and 31 years of secrets. I opened the door. Edmund looked at me, and I watched something happen to his face that I've never seen happen to a human face before. It collapsed and reconstructed simultaneously, like a building falling and being rebuilt in the same second. He was looking at Celeste's face. The same dark eyes, the same jaw, the same way of holding my head slightly tilted when I'm listening, but in a complexion that told him everything about the man Celeste had loved and he'd refused to accept. He gripped the door frame with one hand and closed his eyes for 3 seconds, and when he opened them, they were wet. He walked in. He sat on Thomas's couch. the couch where Thomas watched Jeopardy, where Thomas fell asleep during football games, where Thomas sat with me when I was 14 and told me my mother would have been so proud of you, with a steadiness in his voice that I now understood wasn't calm. It was control. The control of a man holding a secret that was pressing against his ribs every time he looked at his daughter's face and saw someone else's daughter looking back. Edmund looked at Martin, who'd followed him in. He looked at me, and he said the words. "Then she has no idea who she is." "No, sir," Martin said. "She doesn't." "Stop talking about me in the third person," I said. "I'm sitting right here, in my father's house, on my father's couch, and you're going to tell me what was in that box and why you took it and who I am, right now." Edmund looked at me, and for the first time since he walked through the door, his face showed something that wasn't grief or calculation. It was respect. The surprised respect of a man who controls every room he enters, being challenged in a room he doesn't control by a woman sitting on a dead postal worker's couch. He told me, "My mother's name was Celeste Voss, Edmund's only daughter, born 1971. She studied art at NYU. She spent her nights in jazz clubs in Greenwich Village. In 1992, at age 21, she met a man at a club called the Blue Room, a French-Haitian jazz pianist named Julien Moreau, 23 years old. He played piano the way some people breathe," Edmund said, and the way he said it told me that even he, a man who despised Julien for 32 years, couldn't deny the beauty of what Julien's hands did to a keyboard. Celeste fell in love. Edmund disapproved. "Not our kind." He said those words to me sitting on Thomas's couch in a neighborhood of working-class black families in Savannah, and the hypocrisy sat in the room like a fourth person. Not our kind. He said it about a black man to his own biracial granddaughter in a black man's house. The sentence answered several questions I hadn't asked yet. Celeste got pregnant. She told Edmund in December 1992. He gave her an ultimatum: end the pregnancy or leave the family. She refused. Edmund cut her off, from the money, from the house, from the name, from the only world she'd ever known. I was born in March 1993 in a hospital in Brooklyn. Julien was there. But the relationship was fracturing. Two young people with no money, no support, a newborn, and the weight of Edmund's rejection crushing them from above like a ceiling slowly lowering. Celeste started using pills, painkillers first, then more. By the time I was 6 months old, Celeste couldn't care for me. She called Thomas, Edmund's driver, the man who'd been driving the Voss family for 11 years and who'd been the only person in the household who treated Celeste like a human being. Thomas had just retired from driving. He was moving back to Savannah. "Take her," Celeste told Thomas. "Take her somewhere he'll never find her. Raise her. Keep her safe. Don't tell her who she is until it's safe." Thomas took me. He drove from Brooklyn to Savannah with a 6-month-old baby in a car seat and a set of custody documents signed by Celeste. He registered me as Nadia Clement. He told Savannah my mother died in childbirth. He put the custody documents in box 1066 at First National Bank. Insurance. Proof. A truth locked in a vault waiting for the day I might need it. "And you took it," I said to Edmund. "I secured it." "You secured my identity, without my knowledge, without my father's permission. You walked into a bank in a city you've never lived in and took the only thing my father left me because you wanted to control how I found out. Not because you loved me, because controlling information is what you do. It's the only way you know how to interact with people." Edmund flinched, not visibly. But I saw it because I'd spent my life reading my father's micro-expressions across a kitchen table, the almost invisible tells of a man holding something back, and I recognized the same architecture in Edmund's face. The Voss, flinch. The family tell. My first genetic inheritance. "Your mother died in 2005, Edmund said. She was 34. Prescription overdose. In a walk-up apartment in Brooklyn. Alone." The word sat in the room. Alone. The woman who gave me away so I wouldn't be alone died alone. The mathematics of that sentence would take me months to fully calculate. "After she died," Edmund continued, his voice changing, lower now, the register of a man approaching the part of the story where he's the villain and knows it, I realized what I'd done. I'd forced my daughter to choose between her father and her child. She chose the child, and I punished her for it by removing every support system she had: the money, the home, the family. I left her with nothing, and nothing killed her. You didn't leave her with nothing. You left her with me. And then she gave me to Thomas because you made it impossible for her to keep me. Yes, so you destroyed your daughter. And then you spent 19 years looking for the granddaughter she hid from you because your destruction was the reason she needed to hide. Edmund looked at his hands, the hands that had signed the papers that cut Celeste off, the hands that had held the phone when Celeste called him from the hospital after I was born and he hung up, the hands that had written checks to investigators for 19 years, trying to find a child he'd made unfindable by being the kind of father a child needed to be hidden from. Yes, he said again. One syllable, the fullest syllable I'd ever heard from a man whose vocabulary was built for boardrooms and legal briefs and the particular eloquence of wealth. One syllable was all he had, because one syllable was all the truth required. A dying woman in Brooklyn, a billionaire in Manhattan, a postal worker in Savannah, and a baby in a car seat driving south on I-95 in 1993, unnamed, unregistered, invisible, carried by a man who wasn't her father, toward a life where she'd grow up making grits and organizing archives and never knowing that her grandfather's name was on buildings and her mother's name was on a gravestone, and the distance between the two was measured not in miles, but in pride. I want to tell you something about my mother now. Not the mother Thomas described, Catherine, the fictional woman who died in childbirth and had dark eyes and loved art. The real mother, Celeste Voss, the woman who wrote me a letter and hid it inside a copy of The Great Gatsby because she understood that the truth doesn't always belong on paper. Sometimes it belongs inside other stories, waiting for the reader who needs it to find it. I found the letter that night, after Edmund left, after Martin left, after the black sedan pulled away from East 37th Street and the house was quiet, and I was alone with my dead father's furniture and my newly alive identity, and the specific vertigo of a woman who'd been one person at breakfast and was a different person by midnight. The Great Gatsby. Thomas's bookshelf. The book I'd set aside weeks ago because it didn't belong. Thomas Clement didn't read Fitzgerald. He read seed catalogs and Southern Living and the Savannah Morning News. Gatsby was a flag I hadn't recognized until now. I opened it. The pages were hollowed out. A rectangle carved into the center of the text, the words of Fitzgerald sacrificed to make room for a different story. Inside the hollow, a sealed envelope, in handwriting I'd never seen. For Nadia, from your mother, September 1993. My hands were shaking. I sat on the couch, Thomas's couch, and opened the envelope. Inside, a letter, 2 pages, handwritten. The penmanship was uneven, the writing of a 22-year-old woman who was exhausted and medicated and saying goodbye to a baby she'd known for 6 months and would never see again. My darling girl, you are 6 months old as I write this, and you are sleeping in a crib in a Brooklyn apartment that smells like paint and formula and the particular combination of exhaustion and love that defines every new mother's life. I'm giving you away tomorrow. Not because I don't love you, because I love you more than I love myself, and loving yourself is the minimum requirement for keeping a child alive, and I am below the minimum. Your grandfather is a powerful man. He told me to choose between you and his world. I chose you, but choosing you cost me the only world I knew, and I wasn't strong enough to build a new one without it. I am weak, Nadia. I know this. Thomas knows this. He is the strongest man I've ever known, which is why I'm giving you to him instead of to a system that would lose you or a family that would rename you. Thomas will raise you. He will be your father in every way that matters. He will make you grits in the morning because that's what Thomas does. He feeds people, not because they're hungry, but because feeding is how he loves. Your father's name is Julian Moreau. He's a musician. He plays piano the way some people breathe. Automatically, beautifully, without thinking about it. He didn't know I was giving you away. He'll look for you. I hope he finds you. But if he doesn't, Know that he loved you. He wrote you a song the night you were born. He played it in the hospital room while you slept in my arms. The nurses cried. I cried. You slept through the whole thing, which I thought was rude at the time and now think was perfect because the song was really for me, and you knew it. I'm hiding this letter in a book because books are where the truth goes when people aren't ready to hear it. The Great Gatsby seemed right. It's about a man who built a world to impress a woman who didn't deserve it. Your grandfather built a world to control a daughter who wouldn't be controlled. Same story, different money. One day, Thomas will tell you the truth, or you'll find this letter, or both. When that day comes, I want you to know 3 things. 1. Thomas Clement is the best man I've ever known. He is your father, not because of blood, because of grits and homework and 20 years of 6:15 a.m. mornings. Trust him. 2. Your grandfather is not the best man I've ever known, but he is a man, and men who control everything eventually lose the one thing they couldn't control. He lost me. Forgive him anyway, not for his sake, for yours, because anger at a man you've never met is heavier than forgiveness. 3. I loved you. I loved you more than the pills and less than the pain, and exactly enough to know that you deserved better than what I could give. Giving you to Thomas was the only brave thing I ever did. Everything else was survival. This was love. Be an artist, Nadia, or a scientist, or a truck driver. Be whatever fills your lungs. Just don't be afraid. Fear is my disease, not yours. I'm keeping it. Your mother, Celeste. I read the letter 3 times. The first time, I read the words. The second time, I read the woman. The third time, I read the mother, the one I'd been looking for since I was 7 years old, asking Thomas what she looked like, and the answer, I now understood, had always been in the mirror. Edmund came back the next morning. He knocked on the front door at 9 a.m. He was wearing a different suit, but the same expression, the reconstructed composure of a man who'd spent the night in a hotel in Savannah, trying to sleep in a city that wasn't his, thinking about a granddaughter he'd just met and a daughter he'd lost, and the 31 years between those 2 events that he could have filled with presence but filled with pride instead. I opened the door. I was holding the letter. He saw it. He reached for it. I pulled it back. This is mine. I'd like to read it. You had 31 years to read a letter from your daughter, Mr. Voss. You spent those years building companies and attending galas and putting your name on buildings at Columbia and NYU. You don't get to read this now. Celeste wrote it to me, not to you. His composure cracked, fully this time, not the controlled leak of a man managing his emotions. The full break. His chin dropped, his shoulders fell, his eyes filled with the specific tears of a 74-year-old man who has more money than most countries and cannot buy the one thing he needs, which is his daughter's forgiveness from beyond the grave, delivered through a granddaughter who is holding the only letter Celeste ever wrote and won't let him touch it. She told me to forgive you, I said. Edmund looked up. In the letter. She said, anger at a man I've never met is heavier than forgiveness. She told me to let it go, for my sake, not yours. Are you going to? I don't know. I just found out I'm a Voss 12 hours ago. Forgiveness is going to take longer than overnight. What do you need from me? I need you to leave. For now, I need to sit in this house, my father's house, Thomas Clement's house, and process the fact that the man who made me grits every morning was my mother's last act of love. And I need to do that without a billionaire in the living room trying to buy his way back into a family he destroyed. Edmund stood. He straightened his coat. He walked to the door. He stopped. For what it's worth, Nadia, Thomas Clement was a better man than I'll ever be. I hired him to drive a car. He drove my granddaughter to a life. I can't compete with that. I'm not trying to. He left. My mother wrote me a letter in 1993 and hid it in a copy of The Great Gatsby, because books are where the truth goes when people aren't ready to hear it. She told me she was weak. She told me Thomas was strong. She told me my father wrote me a song the night I was born and I slept through it. And she told me she loved me more than the pills and less than the pain and exactly enough to give me away. If someone has ever loved you that specifically, that honestly, in a way that cost them everything and gave you everything, Tell me about it. Because my mother's love wasn't perfect. It was just true. And true love, even the kind that leaves, is worth more than perfect love that never shows up. There was one more person, one more piece, one more truth Thomas had kept in the silence between Grits and Jeopardy: Julian Moreau, my biological father. Edmund's investigators had found him years ago as part of the search. Julian was 55. He lived in New Orleans. He played piano at a jazz club on Frenchman Street. He'd been looking for me for 20 years and never found me because Thomas had changed my name and my city and my story. I flew to New Orleans alone. I didn't bring Edmund. I didn't bring Martin. I brought Celeste's letter and the photograph Edmund had given me the second morning. A photo of Celeste at 22, dark hair, dark eyes, holding a paintbrush, laughing at someone behind the camera, looking exactly like the face I saw in the mirror every morning and never understood until now. The jazz club on Frenchman Street, Thursday night, 9 p.m., the kind of club that smells like old wood and older bourbon, and the particular sweetness of a room where live music has been played so many nights that the walls have absorbed the melody and hum it back when the musicians aren't there. Julian was on stage. He was playing something slow and blue and full of the sadness that jazz carries, because jazz was born from sadness and has never fully let it go, just learned to make it beautiful. I waited until the set ended. He stepped off the small stage. He wiped his forehead with a handkerchief. He walked toward the bar. I stepped into his path. "Mr. Moreau?" He looked at me, and I watched the same thing happen that happened to Edmund, the same collapse and reconstruction, except Julian's version was different. Edmund's was grief. Julian's was recognition, not of a stranger, of a song. He was looking at my face and hearing the melody he'd been playing for 31 years. "Mon Dieu," he said, "my God. My name is Nadia. I think you're my father." Julian's hand went to the piano behind him, the instrument that had been his anchor for 30 years, the thing he held when the world was too unsteady to hold him. He gripped the edge of the piano and looked at me, and his face did something I'd never seen a face do. It smiled and cried at the same time, not alternating, not one then the other, both, simultaneously, the complete emotional paradox of a man seeing for the first time the daughter he'd been searching for since she was 6 months old. "She gave you to Thomas." "Yes, I looked for you. For 20 years I looked. She wrote about you in a letter. She hid it in a book." "What did she say?" "She said you wrote me a song the night I was born." Julian sat down at the piano. He put his hands on the keys. The club was empty now, just us and the bartender and the ghost of every song that had ever been played in that room. He played the song. The one from the hospital room in Brooklyn in 1993. He'd played it thousands of times in 31 years, at clubs and concerts, and alone in his apartment at 3 a.m., always for the same audience of one who wasn't there to hear it. I was there now. I sat in a chair next to the piano on Frenchman Street in New Orleans and listened to my biological father play the song he wrote the night I was born, and the notes hung in the air like a conversation that had been waiting 31 years to happen and was finally happening. When he finished, the silence was the loudest thing in the room. "It's beautiful," I said. "It was always for you," Julian said. 6 months later, March 2025. I didn't move to New York. I didn't take Edmund's money. I stayed in Savannah. I kept my job at SCAD. I kept the house on East 37th Street. I kept Thomas's name, Clement, because Clement is who I am. Not Voss, not Moreau, Clement. The name of the man who drove a baby from Brooklyn to Savannah and never asked for anything in return except the privilege of being her father. Edmund visits. Twice he's come. The visits are careful, stiff. Two people learning how to be a family when the only thing they share is blood, and the only history they have is the history of being kept apart. He wants to give me money. I refuse. "Thomas raised me on a postal worker's salary, Mr. Voss. I'm an archivist. I earn $44,000. I'm fine." "You're a Voss." "I'm a Clement. Voss is a name on a building. Clement is a name on a mailbox on East 37th Street. I'll take the mailbox." Edmund donated $5 million to SCAD's archive program in Celeste's name, anonymously. I found out through my boss. I called Edmund. You donated to my archive. I donated to your mother's memory, in my workplace. It was the only way you'd let me be in your life. I didn't say thank you. I didn't say leave me alone. I said, the archive is naming a preservation lab after Celeste. I told my director about her. Not the full story, just enough. A woman who loved art and never got to finish what she started. Is that acceptable? That's more than acceptable. Julian visits every few months. He plays piano at a club on Congress Street in Savannah. I go. I sit in the front row. He plays the song every time, at the end of the set, and every time he plays it, he looks at me, and I look at him, and the 31 years between the hospital room and the club become, for 3 minutes and 40 seconds, absolutely nothing. We're building a relationship, slowly, one dinner at a time, one song at a time. The way you build anything worth building, with patience and the understanding that some structures take longer because the foundation has to be laid twice, once for the time that was lost and once for the time that remains. I went back to the bank. I had the custody documents returned from Edmund's attorneys. I put them back in box 1066. I added Celeste's letter. I added the photograph. I closed the box. I locked it. Some things belong in vaults, not because they're secret, because they're sacred, and sacred things deserve to be kept the way Thomas kept them, carefully, quietly, in a locked box, in a bank in Savannah, waiting for the person who needs them. Sunday morning, the house on East 37th Street. I'm in the kitchen. I'm making grits. Thomas's recipe. Butter, salt, the wooden spoon, 6:15 a.m. I make them every Sunday because Sunday was our day, the day Thomas didn't work and didn't hurry, and made breakfast slowly, deliberately, the way he did everything, with the patience of a man who understood that the most important things in life can't be rushed. Not grits, not fatherhood, not truth. On the counter, a copy of The Great Gatsby. The hollow is empty now. The letter is in the bank vault. But the book is still here because the book is the vessel, and vessels matter even after they've delivered what they carried. On the mantel, 3 frames. The first, Stanley Clement, the grandfather Thomas told me was mine, who died before I was born. I keep his photo because Thomas kept it, and the things Thomas chose to keep are the things I choose to honor. The second, Celeste. The photograph Edmund gave me, a young woman with a paintbrush, laughing. My face on a woman I'll never meet, my mother, the one who loved me enough to give me away. The third, Julian, a candid shot I took at the club on Congress Street, his hands on the keys, his eyes closed, playing the song. 3 parents on a mantel, one who raised me, one who made me, one who wrote me a song, none of them perfect, all of them mine. The grits are done. I spoon them into a bowl, Thomas's bowl, the blue ceramic bowl with the chip on the rim that he refused to replace because a chip doesn't change the grits, baby girl. I sit at the kitchen table. Thomas's chair is across from me, empty, but not absent. There's a difference. Empty means the person is gone. Absent means they were never there. Thomas Clement was here, every morning. Every grits, every jeopardy, every silence that held a secret, and every secret that held a love so big it couldn't fit inside the truth. Morning, Dad, I say. To the chair, to the kitchen, to the man who drove me from Brooklyn to Savannah in a car that wasn't his, to a house he bought with a salary that was modest and a love that wasn't, and spent 31 years making grits and watching Jeopardy and answering my questions about my mother with carefully constructed fictions that were, I now understand, not lies. They were scaffolding, the temporary structure you build around something fragile while it gets strong enough to stand on its own. The truth was the building. The fictions were the scaffold, and when the scaffold came down, the building was still standing. I'm still standing. The grits are warm. The kitchen smells like butter and salt and home. The book is on the counter. The photos are on the mantel. And Nadia Clement, who spent her career finding things that were lost, has finally found the one thing she didn't know she was looking for. Not her mother, not her grandfather, not her biological father, herself. What's the most important thing a parent ever hid from you? Not to hurt you, to protect you. The truth they carried alone, so you wouldn't have to carry it too soon. The secret they kept in a safe deposit box, or a hollow book, or a locked room in their chest, because they knew you weren't ready, and they loved you enough to wait. Tell me about it. Because the parents who hide things out of love are not the same as the parents who hide things for control. Thomas hid the truth because he loved me. Edmund hid the truth because he wanted to own it. There's a universe between those two reasons. And the child standing in the middle of that universe, holding a key in one hand and a letter in the other, has to decide which reason she's going to build her life around. I chose Thomas's reason. I'll always choose Thomas's reason. And if you're looking at a bookshelf right now at a book that doesn't belong, a book that someone kept for a reason you never understood, open it. Not all stories live between the covers. Some live inside the pages, and some live in the spaces someone carved out when nobody was watching, waiting for the reader who was always meant to find them. I was always meant to find it. I'll see you in the next one.